Why would they take me out of his room and put me in the ED? And then not 20 minutes later, he's dead. It doesn't make sense. Like, did they kill him? He was my one patient that was gonna live. He shouldn't have died. I don't know what they did to him. Something's not right.
I got back to my hotel room and I broke down, like on the floor in tears, like, I can't do this. So I haven't talked about like this part in a long time. I didn't know what else to do, so I called my friends. I told them what was happening. I told them that it was literally gross negligence. Nobody cared. They weren't coding patients that were, a code blue. They would just let them go. And, then reporting to the families that they did everything they could when I know for a fact that they didn't. And when I saw that, that's when I realized nobody is going to believe this. No one's going to believe that this is happening without proof. And so I contacted a couple New York attorneys, and we decided that I needed to go undercover. So I did.
This patient is in with a non-COVID. I don't understand why they're doing that.
I know. There's 4 patients in a row here that are non-COVID. And this is supposed to be the COVID.
Yeah.
Because 7th floor, they shut it down.
That's right. I'm confused.
And then they're going to have non-COVID there.
Yeah.
This is going to be the only COVID, so they shouldn't put any non-COVIDs here.
Well, that's what they've been doing. The guy over in 29, I had him upstairs because I was on CCU before it.
Yeah.
And he came in with a stroke.
I know, that's what 26-1 was stroke.
And no COVID. And now he's got COVID, and he's on a vent.
Well, because we gave it to him here.
My attorney dropped off a pair of spyglasses for me. I got audio recording software for my phone, and I started recording.
My bigger problem with this whole scenario is when they intubate people who don't need it.
Yeah.
And it looks very clear to me that they're just pushing it.
It was like the day before intubation, he was fine on the rebreather.
And then they intubated, and then he got a pneumo, and then they put in a test tube, and then it's pushed.
And now he's 37 years old and dead.
This isn't what my profession stands for. We can't look away. We're mandatory reporters. This is our job, to protect the patient. As nurses, we're patient advocates. Our oath is to do no harm, and that's all that was being done. There were very few actual ICU doctors running these floors. They had residents in. There was ophthalmologists, dentists, people that had absolutely no clue what they were doing. Maybe, 2 or 3 respiratory therapists for the entire hospital, when we needed respiratory therapists for the ventilators because nobody knew how to run them, which also caused death. So they would blow out these patients' lungs and then call it a day. Next patient in, same thing.
Nearly 2,000 people have tested positive for coronavirus. That's bad, and this is worse. Hospitals there are getting ready tonight for a surge. Meantime, Governor Ned Lamont toured a facility manufacturing ventilators for critical care patients. 34 people have died, and federal officials just approved a disaster declaration for the state, and that will allow all 8 counties to be reimbursed for costs associated with the response to the pandemic.
Patients coming into the emergency room would be given no options, and they would be told, if you're not admitted, you're going to die. Essentially, you need to get admitted. And so they did. Fear is a very, very strong emotion, and when people are unaware of what's going on, obviously they're going to trust us. But nobody was telling the truth.
The Comfort now is just pulling into dock here in Newtown, Minnesota.
They could have went to the Comfort shed, where, if they didn't have COVID, that was meant for them, but it was just bypassed. Governor Cuomo said that they were running out of space and they needed extra hospital beds for the patients that didn't have COVID. And so President Trump at the time sent the ship, and the ship was never utilized because they were ordered to stand down. They admitted everybody to these hospitals. They stuffed them in like sardines. because there was financial incentive to do so. It was $13,000 to admit these patients to the hospitals, another $39,000 to put them on a ventilator, and then in some cases people were worth $10,000 per death, with no liability to any of the hospitals, any of the staff, any of the doctors, any of the nurses. And all at the same time, nurses were getting paid $10,000 a week on average. Doctors were getting paid, $50,000, $60,000 a week, and everybody was on gag orders. And if you said anything, you were fired, which ultimately, happened to me at the end of my time in New York.
A Houston hospital is having success treating the coronavirus patients. In fact, its recovery rate is perfect.
Fascinating, isn't it?
To treat patients here, Dr. Veron is using an experimental drug protocol. It's a cocktail of vitamins, steroids, and blood thinners. Each patient also is getting hydroxychloroquine, the malaria drug touted by President Trump. The protocol is controversial because there hasn't been time for extensive testing, but Dr. Veron says it works.
We've treated over 40 plus patients with this treatment, and we haven't had a single complication.
So far, he says, none of his patients have died.
This is time of war. There is no time to double blind anything. This is working. And if it's working, I'm going to keep on doing it.
What we're finding clinically with our patients is that it really only works in conjunction with zinc. So the hydroxychloroquine opens the zinc channel, zinc goes into the cell, it then blocks the replication of the cellular machinery.
You're prescribing it, and it is working for COVID-19 patients.
Every patient I've prescribed it to has been very, very ill, and within 8 to 12 hours, they were basically symptom-free.
And so there's an important concept I want everyone to understand. It's called the absolute risk reduction. And even though there was 90% vaccine efficacy, meaning that in one group from the vaccine down to placebo, there was a 90% reduction in the cases of COVID that happened, the numbers were small. And because the numbers were small means the vaccines could never have an impact broadly in the population. It's mathematically impossible. The absolute risk reduction is what we apply to population. So I knew it. I knew the vaccines would never have an effect. I knew that in November of 2020. Well, as things cranked on, we had more and more resistance to early treatment, but we broke through and we prescribed and we took care of patients. I took care of all my high-risk patients without any hesitation. It was constantly working to treat patients over time to save lives. And I was able to, through coordination, through advice, through others, I was able to treat patients up into their 90s, through their 90s, with sequence multi-drug therapy and keep them out of the hospital. It was clear to me, as I started looking through the literature, the only people being hospitalized and ending up in mechanical ventilators were those who received no early treatment.
They knew that ventilators were the wrong treatment. It was killing 100% of the patients. They couldn't do anything because Cuomo had banned all alternative treatments. So we couldn't use the hydroxychloroquine and zinc protocol. They wouldn't use any, like the high-dose IV vitamin C. Ventilators were the only treatment. And the reason that they did this early on is to keep a closed circuit. That's ultimately what led all these patients to the freezer trucks.
One of the milestones was October 8th. The National Institutes of Health issued its first treatment guidelines for COVID-19. And they said specifically, someone gets COVID-19, they go home in quarantine and do nothing, day by day by day, no treatment. Go into the hospital, sick enough to go in the hospital, no treatment. And then when you're sick enough to go on oxygen, we can start treatment. Remdesivir, a relatively toxic antiviral. It's a polymerase inhibitor. I can tell you by that late in the illness, the virus is not replicating that much. It's not. Wait a minute. There was no drugs up front to impair viral replication, nothing to treat that intercurrent cytokine storm, and nothing to treat thrombosis, nothing. I mean, when the oxygen saturation is going down, my thought is that's blood clots. That's micro blood clots in the lungs. That's not remdesivir time. That's late stage treatment time. But that was the NIH guidelines. Unfortunately, on page 8 of that document, it says, even though these are our recommendations, the doctor in the end can ultimately decide what to do. And I said, thank you. And of course, I was going to do everything that I knew and I had published, and those were my anchors. I was going to do that, and I was not going to let my patients get slaughtered by this virus and have them get no treatment.